The sound of the crystal glass shattering against the marble floor echoed through the Napa Valley vineyard. It was louder than the wedding march that had played only moments before. I stood frozen at the altar looking down at my $12,000 custom silk gown. A dark, jagged stain of Cabernet Sauvignon was spreading across my chest like a fresh wound. My sister Brittany stood next to me, her hand still hovering in the air, a smirk playing on her lips. She did not slip. She did not stumble. She looked me dead in the eye and poured the wine with surgical precision. The 200 guests fell into a deathly silence. I waited for a gasp of horror. I waited for an apology. Instead, a slow, rhythmic clapping started from the front row. My father Gavin and my mother Joyce stood up beaming with pride. "Bravo, Brittany," my mother shouted, her voice shrill and delighted. "You were right, red really is Audrey's color. It matches her bad luck perfectly." The humiliation burned hotter than the wine soaking into my skin, but I did not cry. I simply leaned in close to my sister and my laughing parents and whispered so only they could hear. "I will make all three of you live in hell." Then I smiled, turned around, and walked away. 3 days later, they would realize that was not a threat. It was a promise. I am Audrey, 34 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As the silent owner of Velvet Key, a multi-million-dollar real estate firm, I escaped their financial control years ago, but I maintained the charade of being a struggling assistant to keep the peace. Last Saturday, they turned my wedding into a spectacle of cruelty. Between the ruined dress and the public mockery, my mother leaned forward, sneering. "You know, Audrey, you are lucky we even let you share Brittany's day. Pity goes a long way." I simply wiped the wine from my arm and smiled. That night, I logged in and terminated every family credit account and emailed my lawyer about evicting them from the house I secretly own. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in our affluent Seattle suburb meant appearing perfect to outsiders. But inside our sprawling home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. My childhood bedroom became my sanctuary in prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A's. But my parents only had eyes for Brittany. Chào bạn đã nu bach tang. Tôi đã nằm rõ yêu cô. Dưới đây là nội dung phân đoạn 2 The Kitchen Confrontation, được viết tiếp nối mạch truyền từ phần trước. Kịch bản được viết bằng tiếng Anh tối ưu cho giọng đọc AI, không ký tu la câu, từ dứt khoát tập trung vào sự tương phản giữa sự hào nhoáng của Brittany và sự tủi nhục của Audrey trong nhà bếp. English script for AI voice over segment 2. 30 minutes before the wine destroyed my dress. I was not sipping champagne in the bridal suite with my bridesmaids. Instead, I was standing in the humid, chaotic service kitchen of the vineyard arguing with the catering manager. My father had insisted on the cheapest catering package available, and now they were threatening to serve the appetizers on paper plates because the china rental fee had not been paid. I pulled out my personal credit card, the one my family did not know about, and swiped it to cover the $2,000 difference. The catering staff looked at me with pity. They thought I was the wedding planner. When I told them I was one of the brides, the manager just shook his head and walked away. I walked over to the swinging doors and peeked out into the garden. Through the glass, I saw Brittany. She was posing for a magazine photographer my mother had hired. The sunlight caught her hair perfectly. She looked like a princess. My parents were standing on either side of her, fixing her veil, laughing, looking like the picture-perfect family. I was not in the frame. I was never in the frame. I took a deep breath and turned back to the kitchen mirror to fix my lipstick. That was when the door swung open and my mother Joyce marched in. She did not smile when she saw me. Her eyes narrowed immediately, scanning me from head to toe, looking for a flaw. "What are you doing in here, Audrey?" she snapped. "The guests are arriving." "You smell like kitchen grease." "I was fixing the catering issue Dad forgot to pay for," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Joyce waved her hand dismissively. "Your father is a busy man. You should have handled that weeks ago. But that is not why I came in here." She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto my throat. "What on earth is that around your neck?" I instinctively reached up to touch the necklace. It was a vintage sapphire and diamond pendant, an heirloom from Dante's grandmother. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever worn. Dante gave it to me this morning, I said, a small smile touching my lips. He said it matches my eyes. Take it off, Joyce commanded. Her voice was cold and sharp as a knife. Excuse me, I asked, thinking I had misheard. Take it off right now, she repeated, stepping into my personal space. Brittany is wearing pearls. Simple, elegant pearls. You walking out there with that flashy, gaudy rock is going to distract everyone. You are trying to upstage your sister on her big day. Mom, this is my wedding too, I whispered, the hurt rising in my throat. Joyce laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Oh, honey, stop pretending. We all know this is Brittany's wedding. You and Dante are just piggybacking on the event because we needed to meet the guest minimum for the venue discount. You are the budget bride, Audrey. Act like it. Now give me the necklace or I will tell the DJ to skip your first dance. I stared at her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I could buy this entire vineyard with 1 month of my investment returns. But old habits run deep. The terrified little girl inside me who just wanted her mother's approval took over. My hands trembling, I reached up and unclasped the heavy platinum chain. The moment the cold metal left my skin, I felt naked. I felt small. Joyce snatched the necklace from my hand and shoved it into her pocket. Much better, she said, not even looking at me. Now go stand by the back entrance, and try not to look so miserable. You are ruining the vibe. She turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I looked at my reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator door. My neck was bare. My heart was empty. But as I smoothed down the silk of my dress, a cold resolve settled in my stomach. I realized then that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. They did not want a daughter. They wanted a prop. And I was done playing my part. I pushed open the kitchen doors and walked toward the garden, walking straight into the trap they had set for me. The walk from the service kitchen to the trellis archway felt like a march to the gallows rather than a bridal procession. My father Gavin was waiting for me by the entrance. He did not tell me I looked beautiful. He did not tear up at the sight of his eldest daughter in white. Instead, he checked his gold Rolex and sighed with impatient annoyance. Finally, he muttered, "You are late. Brittany is already lined up. Do not embarrass us by tripping over your own feet." He offered me his arm, not out of affection, but because the choreography demanded it. As the string quartet began to play, Brittany walked down the aisle first. The guests gasped in admiration. She soaked up the attention, blowing kisses, radiating the confidence of a woman who has never been told no in her entire life. Then it was my turn. The applause was polite, muted, almost an afterthought. I kept my eyes locked on Dante at the end of the aisle. He was the only person breathing life into me. When he saw me, his face softened, and I saw him mouth the word, "beautiful." For a second, I forgot about my mother's cruelty and my father's indifference. I just wanted to reach him. We reached the altar. The setup was cramped. Because my parents had insisted on Brittany being the center of attention, she and Kyle stood directly in the middle under the floral arch. Dante and I were positioned slightly to the side, almost like attendants. I took my place next to my sister. The officiant began his opening remarks about love and unity. That was when I felt the tug. It was sharp and violent. My head snapped back, nearly pulling the pins out of my hair. I stumbled, gripping Dante's arm to keep from falling backward. A ripple of confused murmurs went through the crowd. I looked down. Brittany had taken a half-step back. Her white satin stiletto was planted firmly in the middle of my cathedral-length veil. "Sorry," she whispered loudly, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. I lost my balance. I straightened up, adjusting my veil. Accidents happen, I told myself. She is nervous. But as the officiant asked, "Who gives these women to be married?" Brittany shifted her weight again. This time I was watching. She lifted her foot and brought her heel down hard on the delicate tulle fabric, twisting it into the dirt. The tug on my head was harder this time. I heard the sickening sound of expensive fabric tearing. My father, who was still standing nearby before taking his seat, didn't even blink. He just nudged me forward, his eyes warning me to stop making a scene. I froze, trapped by the fabric anchored under her weight. I tried to gently pull the veil free, but she pressed down harder. The officiant paused, sensing the awkwardness. Dante looked ready to shove her, but I squeezed his hand, begging him silently to wait. Brittany leaned toward me, pretending to adjust her own train. To the guests, it looked like a sisterly moment of support, but her voice was low, venomous, and meant only for me. "Stop trying to pull away," she hissed. "I did not slip, Audrey. I just do not want you looking better than me in my wedding photos. Stand still and know your place." She held my gaze for a second longer, a look of pure, spoiled entitlement, before finally lifting her foot. The fabric of my veil was torn and muddy, destroyed, before I had even said I do. I stood there, my neck stinging from the whiplash, realizing that the wine incident that was about to happen was not a moment of madness. It was the grand finale of a calculated performance. The wine dripped off the hem of my dress, onto the white runner, staining the pristine fabric with jagged red splotches. The silence in the vineyard was heavy, suffocating. Every eye was on me, waiting for a reaction. I could feel the cold liquid soaking through to my skin, but the chill in my heart was colder. Brittany stood there, her hand covering her mouth in a performance of shock that would not have fooled a child. "Oh my God," she said, her voice pitched high and unnatural. "I am so sorry, Audrey. I was just so overwhelmed by the moment." Before I could speak, before I could even process the humiliation, Kyle stepped forward. He looked genuinely horrified. His face was pale as he reached into his pocket for a handkerchief. "Audrey, I am so sorry," Kyle stammered, extending his hand toward me. "This is terrible. Let me help you dry that off." He never got the chance. My mother Joyce moved with the speed of a viper striking its prey. She grabbed Kyle's arm and yanked him back, her fingernails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "Don't be ridiculous," Kyle Joyce said, her voice loud enough to carry to the back rows. "It is just a dress. Audrey is used to these little accidents. She has always been clumsy. Besides, we cannot pause the ceremony for a stain. The photographer is on a tight schedule." She turned her gaze to me, her eyes hard and unyielding. "Go stand at the back, Audrey. You are ruining the aesthetic. We will Photoshop you out of the official pictures later. You are used to being in the background anyway, right, honey?" The cruelty of her words hung in the air like smoke. My own mother was not only dismissing my humiliation, but actively encouraging it. She was erasing me from my own wedding day in real time. That was when Dante moved. Throughout the ceremony, he had been a pillar of calm, respecting my wish to keep the peace. But the peace was shattered now. He stepped forward, placing himself physically between me and my family. He did not yell, he did not make a scene. He simply looked at my mother with a gaze so cold it could have frozen the wine on my dress. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he reached up to his lapel. He unpinned the white rose boutonniere that my mother had insisted all the men wear to match Brittany's bouquet. He held it up for a second, letting them see it, letting them understand the symbol. Then he dropped it into the dirt. He lifted his foot and crushed the white petals into the mud. The message was clear. The alliance was broken. The family tie was severed. My father Gavin stood up, his face turning a shade of purple that matched the wine. "What do you think you are doing?" he demanded. "Pick that up. You are disrespecting this family." Dante ignored him completely. He turned to me, his back to them, shielding me from their stares. He took off his tuxedo jacket and wrapped it around my shoulders, covering the red stain. "We are done here," Dante said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. He took my hand, interlacing his fingers with mine. For the first time all day, I felt safe. I looked at Brittany, who was still smirking behind her hand. I looked at my parents, who were fuming at the interruption of their perfect show. And I realized Dante was right. We were done. "Let's go," I whispered. We turned and began to walk back down the aisle, against the grain, against the expectations, leaving the altar behind. The sound of our footsteps on the wooden runner was the only sound in the entire vineyard. We were walking away from the life they had designed for me, and toward the war I was about to declare. The wooden runner beneath my feet felt miles long as Dante and I walked toward the exit of the vineyard. To my left and right, the faces of our guests were a blur of shock and confusion. I did not look at them. I kept my eyes fixed on the vintage silver Rolls-Royce Phantom waiting at the end of the path, its engine idling softly, a beacon of escape. I could hear the murmurs starting to rise behind us, a tide of gossip that would undoubtedly wash over the entire reception. But I did not care. For the first time in my life, I was walking away from the script my family had written for me. Just as we reached the wrought iron gates, a hand clamped down on my upper arm. The grip was tight, painful, and familiar. I stopped and turned to see my father, Gavin. He was out of breath. His face flushed a deep, angry crimson that clashed with his expensive tuxedo. I expected him to ask if I was okay. I expected him to apologize for laughing while his youngest daughter humiliated his eldest. I expected foolishly for him to be a father. "Where the hell do you think you are going?" Gavin hissed, his fingers digging into my skin through the wine-soaked silk of my dress. "You cannot just storm off like a petulant child. The reception is starting in 10 minutes. We have guests to entertain." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his eyes. There was no love there, only panic and irritation. "Let go of me," I said, my voice dangerously calm. Gavin ignored me. He looked past me to Dante, then back to the car. "You are not leaving, Audrey. The catering contract requires the 20% gratuity to be paid in full before the salad course is served. You know I do not carry that kind of cash on me. You need to go to the office and sign the check." I stared at him, blinking slowly. The absurdity of the moment washed over me. My dress was ruined. My wedding was destroyed. My heart was breaking. And my father was worried about who was going to tip the waiters. "You want me to pay the tip?" I asked, clarifying the transaction one last time. "Yes," Gavin snapped, checking his watch. "And stop being dramatic. You can put a shawl over that stain. Just go sign the check so we can get this over with." Brittany is waiting for the toast. Something inside me finally died then. It was the little girl who used to wait by the window for her dad to come home. She was gone. I pulled my arm free from his grasp with a sharp jerk. I took a step back, creating a physical distance that matched the emotional chasm opening between us. "No," I said. Gavin looked stunned. "Excuse me?" I said no. "I am not signing the check. I am not paying the tip. I am not paying for the salad, the steak, or the champagne you are about to drink. But it is in your name," Gavin sputtered, his voice rising in panic. "Not anymore," I replied. Dante opened the rear door of the Rolls-Royce. I slid onto the leather seat, the cool air conditioning hitting my flushed face. My father took a step toward the car, his mouth opening to shout another demand, another insult, another order. I looked at him one last time through the open door. I did not frown. I did not cry. I looked at him with the cold indifference of a stranger. "Good luck with the bill, Dad," I said. Then I reached out, grabbed the handle, and slammed the heavy door shut. The sound was solid and final, like the closing of a vault. As the car pulled away, I watched through the tinted glass as my father stood alone in the dust, his mouth still open, growing smaller and smaller, until he was nothing but a speck in my rearview mirror. Inside the Rolls-Royce, the silence was instant and absolute. The heavy soundproof glass cut off my father's shouting mid-syllable, reducing him to a silent, flailing figure in the rearview mirror. I watched him shrink away as the driver navigated us out of the vineyard estate. Beside me, Dante loosened his tie, his dark eyes scanning my face for any sign of a breakdown. He reached out to touch my hand, his fingers warm and steady against my cold skin. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I looked down at the wine stain on my dress. It was already drying, turning a dark, ugly purple. 10 years ago, this would have destroyed me. 10 years ago, I would have been sobbing, begging for their forgiveness, wondering what I had done to make them hate me so much. But today, I felt nothing. The sadness had evaporated, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a weapon. "I am better than okay," I said. "I am done." I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I unlocked the screen and navigated past the usual social media apps to a folder hidden on the second page. I opened an app called Velvet Key. It was a proprietary interface for my private equity firm, the one my family thought was just a made-up name for my administrative assistant job. To them, Velvet Key was the company that paid me a mediocre salary to organize files. In reality, Velvet Key was the holding company that owned the debt on their house, the lease on their cars, and the credit lines that fueled their delusions of grandeur. Face ID recognized me instantly. The dashboard loaded, displaying a net worth figure that would have given my father a heart attack. I scrolled down to the section labeled Dependents and Liabilities. It was a folder I had created 5 years ago to quietly save them from bankruptcy. There they were. 3 active profiles. Gavin, Joyce, Brittany. I tapped on my father's profile first. The screen showed his current location at the vineyard and his recent transactions. The $20,000 deposit for the venue. The $5,000 suit he was wearing. All paid for by a supplementary card linked to my personal assets disguised as a bank loan he thought he had miraculously been approved for. I pressed the button marked Freeze Assets. A confirmation window popped up asking if I was sure I wanted to suspend all credit privileges for Gavin Wilson. I did not hesitate. I tapped Yes. Next was my mother. Her profile showed pending charges for a spa weekend she had booked for next month to recover from the stress of the wedding. I canceled it. I moved to the Recurring Payments tab, the lease on her Mercedes, the membership to the country club where she sneered at the waitstaff. Terminate. 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 Finally, I opened Brittany's profile. The golden child. The sister who had just destroyed my dress and laughed about it. Her profile was the most expensive. Her lifestyle blog, her apartment rent, her credit card bills. All of it was subsidized by me under the guise of family trust dividends that did not actually exist. I looked at the transaction history. A charge for $500 at a liquor store yesterday. Vintage Cabernet Sauvignon. She had bought the wine that ruined my dress with my own money. The irony was almost poetic. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. Goodbye, Brittany, I whispered. I selected the option specifically programmed for this moment, a nuclear option I never thought I would use. Total dissolution. I pressed the red button. The screen flashed processing, then completed. Access revoked. I locked the phone and dropped it back into my purse. I looked out the window as the Napa Valley scenery rolled by lush and green. We were heading toward the highway, toward San Francisco, toward freedom. Dante squeezed my hand. What did you just do? He asked. I turned to him, the ghost of the girl they used to abuse gone from my eyes. I just cut the strings, I said. The puppets are on their own now. Back at the Vineyard estate, the party was raging. While I was in the back of the Rolls-Royce dismantling their financial lives with a few taps on my phone, my family was celebrating my departure as if they had just won the lottery. Brittany sat at the head table, the center of attention, finally free from the competition she had invented in her own head. She had changed into a second dress, a shimmering silver gown that she had charged to my emergency credit card 2 days prior. She was laughing, throwing her head back, basking in the adoration of guests who were too polite to ask why the other bride had vanished. My father, Gavin, was in his element. He snapped his fingers at a passing sommelier, his chest puffed out with the arrogance of a man spending money he did not earn. Bring us the Chateau Margaux, 1990, he commanded, his voice booming over the jazz band. 3 bottles, no, make it 5. We are celebrating a family milestone today. My mother Joyce leaned in, clinking her glass against his. To getting things back to the way they should be, she toasted. Audrey was just a dark cloud anyway. The photos will look so much better without her sulking in the background. Brittany took a sip of her drink and giggled. She is probably crying in some cheap motel room right now, wondering why no one chased after her. It is kind of pathetic when you think about it. They ate the filet mignon. They devoured the lobster tails. They drank the vintage wine that cost $4,000 a bottle. They were feasting on the corpse of my generosity, unaware that the carcass had already been picked clean. The shift in the atmosphere happened exactly 2 hours into the reception. The jazz band was playing a fast-tempo number when the venue manager, a stern man named Mr. Henderson, approached the head table. He was not smiling. He was not carrying a silver platter or a fresh bottle of wine. He was holding a black leather billfold. Mr. Henderson stopped directly behind my father. Mr. Wilson, he said, his voice low but firm enough to cut through the laughter. I apologize for the interruption, but we have an urgent issue regarding the final payment for the event. Gavin waved his hand dismissively, not even turning around. Just put it on the card on file. We have authorized the overage. My daughter Audrey handles the logistics. Go find her if you need a signature. Mr. Henderson did not move. We attempted to run the card on file 10 minutes ago, sir. It was declined. We tried the backup card. Also declined. We tried to locate Ms. Audrey, but the security team informed us she left the premises hours ago. The laughter at the table died instantly. My mother froze with a fork full of cake halfway to her mouth. Brittany lowered her glass, her eyes darting between the manager and our father. Declined. Gavin repeated, his face flushing. That is impossible. That card has a practically unlimited limit. There must be a system error on your end. Run it again. Run it. We ran it 3 times, Mr. Henderson said, his tone losing its professional warmth. The issuer signals that the account has been terminated by the primary account holder. As per our contract, the remaining balance is due upon commencement of the reception. We allowed a grace period, but now that you have ordered the vintage reserves, we need to settle the tab immediately. Gavin stood up, trying to use his height to intimidate the manager. This is ridiculous. How much could it possibly be? Mr. Henderson opened the leather folder and slid the invoice across the white tablecloth. It landed right next to Brittany's half-eaten cake. $85,420, the manager stated calmly. That includes the venue fee, the catering, the security, and the 1990 vintage wines you just opened. We need a valid form of payment right now, Mr. Wilson, or we will be forced to halt the service and involve the authorities. For the first time all day, my father looked truly terrified. He looked at the bill. He looked at my mother. And then he looked at the 5 open bottles of wine on the table, realizing he had just drunk a liquid that cost more than his car. My father stared at the invoice, as if it were written in a foreign language. He laughed, a short, nervous sound that did not reach his eyes. He picked up his wine glass, taking a large gulp of the liquid gold he could no longer afford, and waved his hand at Mr. Henderson with the casual arrogance of a man who had never faced a consequence in his life. You are mistaken, Gavin said, his voice dripping with condescension. I told you, put it on Audrey's account. She handles the finances for these events. She is probably just having a tantrum somewhere because of the dress. Just override the decline code. I give you my personal authorization as her father. Mr. Henderson did not blink. He did not retreat. He stood like a statue of judgment in his black suit. I am afraid that is not how it works, Mr. Wilson. He said, his voice loud enough for the guests at the neighboring tables to hear. The authorization was not declined due to a technical error. It was revoked. Specifically, Ms. Audrey logged into the payment portal 15 minutes ago and flagged all pending charges from this location as unauthorized fraudulent activity. The word fraudulent hung in the air over the head table like a guillotine blade. My mother Joyce dropped her fork. The silver clattered loudly against her china plate. Fraudulent, Joyce hissed, standing up. How dare she? We are her parents. She owes us this wedding. Call her immediately, Gavin. Tell her to fix this mess before I write her out of the will. Mr. Henderson took a step closer, invading their personal space. We have already attempted to contact the primary cardholder. She has blocked the venue's number. And frankly, given that she is the one with the confirmed assets, we are inclined to believe her claim that you are spending money you do not possess. Gavin turned a deep shade of crimson. Listen to me, you little bureaucrat, he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Do you know who I am? I am Gavin Wilson. I have done business in this town for 30 years. I am good for the money. Just send me a bill next month. The manager shook his head slowly. No, sir. This bill is $85,000. That is not a tab we leave open. Our policy for amounts over $10,000 is immediate settlement. If you cannot produce a valid credit card or a wire transfer confirmation within the next 10 minutes, we will be forced to treat this as theft of services. Theft, Brittany screeched, looking up from her phone. Are you accusing us of stealing? Mr. Henderson looked at the half-empty bottles of vintage wine. I am stating facts, ma'am. You have consumed inventory you have not paid for. In the state of California, defaulting on a bill of this magnitude is a felony. I have the Napa Valley Sheriff's Department on speed dial. They are currently patrolling the highway less than 2 miles from here. So, Mr. Wilson, I will ask you one last time. How would you like to pay? Or should I ask the officers to bring handcuffs when they arrive? The music from the jazz band trailed off into an awkward silence. The chatter from the guests stopped completely. 200 people were now staring at the head table. The illusion of the wealthy, perfect Wilson family was shattering in real time. And for the first time, my father realized there was no safety net beneath him. He patted his pockets, his hands trembling, looking for a wallet that he knew was empty of anything but plastic cards that no longer worked. My father reached into his tuxedo pocket and produced the heavy titanium card he liked to flash at business dinners. It was a black card, the kind that was supposed to signal unlimited wealth and power. He held it out with 2 fingers, not even looking at the manager, his other hand still clutching the neck of a wine bottle. Run it again, Gavin commanded, and add a $500 tip for your trouble. The manager took the card without a word. He inserted it into the portable chip reader. The room was so quiet that everyone could hear the machine processing. Then came the sound, a harsh, dissonant beep that cut through the tension like a knife. The small screen flashed a single word in bright red letters. Declined. Gavin laughed nervously. That is ridiculous. The chip is probably dirty. Swipe it. The manager complied. He swiped the card. The machine beeped again. Declined. Authorization revoked. My father's face went from red to a sickly shade of white. He turned to my mother. Joyce, give him your card. I will transfer the money to you tomorrow. My bank is obviously having a system outage. My mother sighed, clearly annoyed that her husband was failing to handle a simple transaction. She opened her clutch and pulled out her platinum card. She handed it to the manager with a look of pure disdain. Do be quick about it, she said. The ice in the bucket is melting. The manager inserted Joyce's card. The machine thought for a second longer this time. Then the same result. Beep. Declined. This is broken, Joyce shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. Your internet is down. There is no way both our cards are not working. We have perfect credit. The manager looked at the screen. Actually, ma'am, the error code is specific. It says, over limit. Desperation began to set in. Gavin turned to Brittany. Sweetheart, use your card. The one for emergencies. We will sort this out with the bank in the morning. Brittany rolled her eyes. This is so embarrassing, Dad. I cannot believe you are making me pay for my own wedding reception. She dug into her purse and threw her gold card onto the table. Just take it. The manager picked it up. He ran the card. Beep. Declined. 3 cards. 3 rejections. The guests were whispering loudly now. The illusion of the Wilson family dynasty was evaporating. Gavin grabbed the manager by the lapel. What is going on here? Who is declining these charges? The manager pulled away, straightening his suit. He looked at the tablet connected to the payment system. It appears that for the last 5 years, all 3 of these accounts were being serviced by a monthly auto payment from an external source. A trust called Velvet Key, LLC. That external source canceled the automatic payments approximately 40 minutes ago. Without those payments, your balances are all significantly over the limit. In fact, you are all currently in default. My father slumped back into his chair. He knew the name Velvet Key. He saw it on the statements every month, but he never asked who was behind it. He just assumed it was some family inheritance dividend he was entitled to. He never realized that Velvet Key was me. He never realized that I had been quietly paying off their debts every single month to keep up appearances. And he certainly never realized that by driving me away, he had just cut off his own financial lifeline. The bill was due, and for the first time in their lives, they had to pay it themselves. The humiliation was not just about the money, it was about the audience. Sitting directly across from the head table were Kyle's parents, the Montgomerys. They were old money, the kind of people who viewed credit cards as vulgar and public scenes as mortal sins. Throughout the dinner, they had looked down their noses at my family, and now their suspicions were being confirmed in high definition. Mrs. Montgomery leaned over to her husband, not even bothering to lower her voice. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "They are insolvent. I told you, dear. They have been leveraging debt to finance this lifestyle. We should have insisted on a prenup for Kyle." Kyle turned a deep shade of beet red. "Mom, please," he hissed, looking at Brittany, who was currently staring at her lap, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole. My father Gavin heard the comment. It hit him harder than the declined credit card. His reputation was his currency, and it was plummeting faster than the stock market in a crash. He looked at the venue manager, desperation leaking from his pores. "Look, there is no need to involve the police," Gavin stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It is a misunderstanding. I will have my banker wire the full amount first thing Monday morning. I am good for it. You know who I am." The manager remained unmoved. "I know who you were, Mr. Wilson. But right now, you are a customer with an $85,000 tab and no means to pay it. If you cannot produce payment, I need collateral. Something of equal value to hold until the wire clears. Otherwise, my instructions are to press charges for theft of services." Collateral. My mother. Joyce gasped. "This is a wedding, not a pawn shop." The manager checked his watch. "You have 2 minutes before I make the call." Gavin looked around the room. He looked at the Montgomerys, who were watching him with looks of pure pity and disgust. He looked at Brittany, who was useless. He looked at his empty hands. Then his eyes fell to his left wrist. He was wearing a solid gold Rolex Submariner. It was the only tangible asset he had on him. The irony was suffocating. I had bought him that watch for his 60th birthday last year. I had saved for 6 months to buy it, a token of love for a father who barely acknowledged my existence. He had bragged about it to everyone, claiming he bought it himself to celebrate a big deal. Now the gift from the daughter he had just cast aside was the only thing standing between him and a jail cell. With trembling fingers, Gavin unclasped the heavy gold band. The mechanism clicked, a sound that seemed to echo in the silent room. He slid the watch off his wrist. The tan line underneath was pale and vulnerable. "Here," Gavin said, his voice cracking. He held the watch out to the manager. "It is worth $40,000. Keep it until Monday." The manager took the watch. He inspected it under the light, checking the serial number, treating my father's prized possession like a piece of scrap metal. "This will cover the catering?" the manager said coldly, slipping the watch into his pocket. "But it does not cover the venue fee. You are still short. What else do you have?" Gavin looked at his wife. Joyce instinctively clutched her diamond earrings, the ones she had forced me to polish earlier that morning. The realization hit them both at once. They were being stripped bare piece by piece in front of the very people they had tried so desperately to impress. And the ghost of my absence was laughing at them from every corner of the room. The reception did not end with a joyful sparkler send-off. It ended with the humiliating clinking of silverware as guests tried to eat quickly and leave. The jazz band had stopped playing, packing up their instruments in an awkward silence that hung over the room like a funeral shroud. My father sat at the head table, staring at the empty space on his wrist where his Rolex used to be. The venue manager had taken it along with my mother's diamond earrings as collateral, just to let them walk out the front door without handcuffs. The Montgomerys' Kyle's parents had already left without saying goodbye, their disappointment in their future in-laws radiating off them in waves. Gavin Wilson was a man who prided himself on control, and for the first time in 30 years he had none. The shame quickly curdled into rage. Pure, unadulterated rage directed at the only person he felt was responsible. Me. He did not blame his own lack of funds. He did not blame Brittany's cruelty. He blamed me for turning off the tap. He marched out to the parking lot, the gravel crunching under his dress shoes, his phone in his hand. I was already miles away, sitting on the balcony of a hotel suite in San Francisco, watching the city lights flicker on. My phone buzzed on the glass table. The screen lit up with the word, Dad. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to wonder if I was gone for good. Then slowly, I picked up. I did not say hello. Audrey. My father roared, his voice distorting the speaker. You ungrateful little brat. Do you have any idea what you just did? The manager took my watch. My Rolex, Audrey. The one you gave me. You humiliated us in front of the Montgomerys. You ruined your sister's wedding. Fix this right now. Turn the cards back on and wire the money, or so help me God, I will cut you off forever. I took a sip of water, listening to his threats with a detachment that surprised even me. He was still trying to threaten me with exile, not realizing I had already burned the bridge myself. He truly believed he still held the power. Are you finished? I asked quietly. No, I am not finished, he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. You are going to apologize to your sister. You are going to pay that bill plus interest, and you are going to come back here on your knees. Who do you think you are? You are nothing without this family. You are nothing without my name. I looked out at the skyline. I thought about the years of insults, the years of paying their bills while wearing thrift store clothes, the years of buying their love and getting nothing but disdain in return. I am the person who owns the roof over your head, Dad. I said, my voice cold and hard as steel, or at least I was until this morning. There was a stunned silence on the other end. What are you talking about? He stammered. I leaned into the phone, delivering the final verdict. You said I was nothing without you. Now you get to see exactly what you are without me. Welcome to the world of those without my sponsorship. Good luck, Dad. You are going to need it. I pressed the red button and ended the call. I did not block the number. I wanted to see the missed calls pile up as the reality of their new life set in. I placed the phone face down and looked at Dante. For the first time in my life, I was free. It was 2 a.m. when the taxi dropped my parents and Brittany off at the driveway of the family estate. They had spent 3 hours arguing with the venue manager, eventually signing a promissory note that was worth less than the paper it was printed on just to escape custody. Now they were exhausted, humiliated, and seething with rage. The rain had started to fall during the drive back to Seattle, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked into their expensive clothes and ruined what was left of Brittany's hair. They stood on the pavement as the taxi sped away, leaving them in the oppressive darkness of the suburbs. Gavin marched up the front steps, ready to storm inside, pour himself a scotch, and call his lawyer to draft a lawsuit against me. He reached for the smart lock panel next to the mahogany double doors. He punched in the 4-digit code. 1985. The year he married my mother. Usually the lock would beep cheerfully and the deadbolt would slide back. Tonight, the panel flashed a harsh, angry red. Access denied. Gavin cursed under his breath. He wiped the rain from the screen and typed it again, harder this time, jabbing his finger against the glass. Access denied. System lockout active. Open the damn door, Gavin! My mother hissed from the bottom of the steps. She was shivering, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. It is freezing out here and my feet are killing me. Stop playing around with the electronics. Brittany was leaning against a stone pillar, scrolling through her phone, frantically deleting negative comments from her wedding hashtag. Dad, hurry up, she whined. My battery is at 4% and I need to charge it. I can't believe Audrey did this. She probably changed the Wi-Fi password too. I am trying, Gavin shouted back, his patience snapping. The system is glitching. It must be the rain. He dug into his pocket and pulled out his keyring. He found the physical backup key, a heavy brass master key, that had opened this door since I was a child. He jammed it into the keyhole. It went in halfway and stopped. It hit a solid wall of metal. He twisted it. He shoved it. He jiggled it up and down. Nothing. The key would not turn because the cylinder was different. The lock had not just been reset digitally. It had been physically replaced. Gavin stepped back, looking up at the dark house. The windows were black, staring back at him like empty eyes. The security system light, usually a blinking green, was a steady, unblinking red. He grabbed the door handle and rattled it violently, shaking the entire frame. "Audrey!" he screamed, his voice cracking in the night air. "Open this door! I know you did this! Open this door right now, or I will break it down!" But the door did not budge. It was a reinforced steel core door installed by me 2 years ago for security. My father stood there wet and shivering, realizing that his key was useless. He turned to my mother and sister, his face pale in the moonlight. "She changed the locks." He whispered, the reality finally piercing through his anger. "She changed the physical locks. We are locked out." The realization that the key did not work was bad enough. But then the motion sensor floodlights washed the front lawn in a harsh, blinding white glare. It was my mother, Joyce, who saw it first. She let out a scream that was less about fear and more about pure materialistic horror. "Oh my God!" she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger toward the manicured hydrangeas. Look at the lawn." Gavin turned away from the useless door. Brittany looked up from her dead phone. There, stacked haphazardly on the wet grass like garbage awaiting collection, was a mountain of cardboard boxes. Dozens of them. Brittany ran toward the pile, her silver heels sinking into the soft mud. She clawed at the top box, ripping the tape off with desperate, frantic movements. "No," she wailed. "No, no, no." She pulled out a handful of fabric. It was her designer wardrobe, her cashmere sweaters, her silk blouses, her limited edition denim. All of it had been shoved into boxes, without hangers or protective covers. And because the boxes had been sitting out there for hours, the dampness from the ground had already started to seep through the cardboard. "My vintage Chanel," Brittany sobbed, holding up a tweed jacket that was now damp and smelling of wet earth. She threw it on the lawn. "You ruined it. You ruined everything." Gavin marched over to a stack of plastic bins. He kicked the lid off one. Inside were his golf clubs, his humidors, and his collection of signed baseballs. Next to it was a box containing my mother's furs, now exposed to the humid night air. "This is illegal!" Gavin roared at the empty house. "You cannot just throw our property on the street. This is a wrongful eviction. I know my rights." As if on cue, the sky opened up. The light drizzle that had been falling all night suddenly turned into a torrential downpour. Cold, relentless rain hammered down on them, soaking into the cardboard boxes, turning the bottom layers into mush. Joyce tried to drag a box of her shoes under the shelter of the porch, but the bottom gave way. A dozen pairs of Louboutins and Jimmy Choos tumbled out, splashing into the muddy puddles forming on the driveway. "Grab the bags," Gavin yelled, trying to shield his head with a soaking wet newspaper. "Get the important things. We need to get out of the rain." But there was nowhere to go. The garage door opener had been disabled. The patio doors were locked. The guest house was keyed to the same electronic system that was currently flashing red. They were trapped in the open, surrounded by the physical manifestation of their greed, watching as the rain destroyed the only things they truly loved. Brittany sat down right there in the mud, her silver dress ruined, clutching a sodden handbag to her chest. She looked like a child whose toy had been taken away. "Why is this happening?" she cried, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. Joyce looked at the house, then at the pile of wet boxes, and finally understood the magnitude of what I had done. "She did not just lock us out," Joyce whispered, her voice trembling with cold and shock. "She evicted us. She packed us up and threw us away." The silence of the suburbs was shattered by the wail of sirens. 2 patrol cars turned the corner, their blue and red strobe lights cutting through the heavy rain and illuminating the humiliating scene on the front lawn. My father, Gavin, let out a sigh of relief. He straightened his soaked tuxedo jacket and wiped the water from his eyes. In his delusional mind, the police were here to serve him. He believed they were here to arrest me for hacking the smart locks and to force the doors open so he could reclaim his throne. He ran toward the first cruiser before it even came to a full stop. He banged his fist on the hood, shouting over the sound of the rain. "Thank God you are here. My daughter has gone insane. She has locked us out of our own property. You need to break down the door immediately. She is inside holding our home hostage." The door of the cruiser opened. Officer Miller, a large man who had responded to noise complaints at our parties before stepped out. He did not look sympathetic. He looked tired. Behind him, a black sedan pulled up. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped out holding a large black umbrella. He looked perfectly dry and composed, a stark contrast to my shivering, mud-stained family. Officer Miller held up a hand to stop my father's ranting. "Step back, Mr. Wilson," the officer commanded. "We received a call about a disturbance and potential trespassing." "Trespassing?" Gavin sputtered, his face turning purple. "You are damn right there is trespassing. My daughter illegally changed the codes. I want her arrested. I want her in handcuffs. This is my house. I built this life. I am Gavin Wilson." The man in the gray suit stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Mr. Wilson, my name is Arthur Sterling. I am the legal counsel for Velvet Key Limited Liability Company. I am here to enforce the immediate eviction notice served to you electronically 30 minutes ago." Gavin froze. The name Velvet Key hung in the air like a curse. He looked from the lawyer to the police officer. "Eviction?" Gavin laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "You are out of your mind. I have lived here for 25 years. You cannot evict a man from his own home. I will sue you. I will sue this entire department. I will bury you in litigation so deep you will never see the sun again." Officer Miller placed a hand on his belt. "Mr. Wilson, calm down. This gentleman has provided us with documentation stating that the property at 42 Oak Lane is owned solely by Velvet Key LLC. He claims your lease was terminated for cause due to violation of the Code of Conduct clause regarding financial insolvency and criminal misconduct." "That is a lie," Gavin screamed. He lunged toward the lawyer, but Officer Miller stepped in between them, his hand moving to his chest to push my father back. "Sir, stand down," Miller warned. Gavin pointed a shaking finger at the house. "I own this. Me. My name is on the deed." Arthur Sterling opened his briefcase. He pulled out a document protected by a plastic cover to keep it dry. He shone a flashlight on the paper. "Actually, Mr. Wilson, you sold the deed to Velvet Key 5 years ago to cover your gambling debts in Las Vegas. You signed a lease agreement to rent the property back for $1 a year, provided you maintained good standing. The owner, Ms. Audrey, has been gracious enough to let you pretend you still owned it. But as of tonight, that grace period is over." Officer Miller looked at my father. His eyes were hard. "Mr. Wilson, do you have any documentation proving you currently own this home? Do you have a deed? Do you have a title? Or are you just a tenant who has been kicked out by the landlord?" The question hit my father like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to scream, to lie, to bluster, but nothing came out. He looked at the house. He looked at the lawyer. And he realized that the paper shield he had been hiding behind for half a decade had just been incinerated. Arthur Sterling stood under his black umbrella, unbothered by the storm that was soaking my family to the bone. He held the document up, the plastic cover glistening in the harsh white light of the police cruisers. My father Gavin squinted at the paper, water dripping from his nose, his eyes widening as recognition began to dawn on him. He knew this document. He had signed it 2 years ago in a smoky backroom in Las Vegas, desperate to keep his wife from finding out he had gambled away the mortgage payments. "I do not understand," Gavin stammered, his voice trembling. "That was a private loan, a bridge loan from an anonymous investor group. I am paying it back. I have a payment plan." Arthur shook his head slowly. "No, Mr. Wilson. You defaulted on that payment plan 18 months ago. You sold the title of this property to Velvet Key LLC in exchange for total debt forgiveness. The company allowed you to remain on the premises under a $0 lease agreement purely as a courtesy to maintain your social standing. You do not own the bricks. You do not own the land. You are and have been for 2 years a guest." My mother Joyce grabbed Gavin's wet sleeve. "What is he talking about, Gavin? What gambling debt? You told me the business was just having a slow quarter. You told me the house was safe." Gavin shook her off, too terrified to look her in the eye. He turned back to the lawyer. "Fine. So Velvet Key owns it. I will talk to them. I will call the board of directors tomorrow. I will make them an offer. I know people. I can fix this. Just let us inside tonight." Arthur smiled a thin, sharp expression that contained zero warmth. "I am afraid the sole proprietor of Velvet Key, LLC, has given strict instructions. No negotiation, no entry. And as for calling the board of directors, you do not need to wait until tomorrow. She is the one who sent me here." He flipped the document to the last page. He tapped his finger against the signature line at the bottom right next to the title, Managing Member. He shone his flashlight directly on the name, illuminating it in the darkness. Gavin leaned in. Joyce peered over his shoulder. Brittany looked up from the mud. The name on the deed was not a corporation. It was not a bank. It was signed in elegant, familiar cursive. Audrey Wilson. The silence that followed was louder than the thunder. My father staggered back as if he had been physically struck. He looked at the signature, then at the house, then at the lawyer. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. The daughter he had called useless, the girl he had treated like a servant, the woman he had just tried to bully into paying a catering bill, owned the very ground he was standing on. "Audrey." My mother whispered, her voice breaking. "Audrey owns the house." Arthur nodded. "She bought your debt, Mrs. Wilson. She saved this family from bankruptcy 2 years ago without asking for a thank you. She allowed you to live here rent-free while you treated her like a second-class citizen. But as of tonight, she has decided to liquidate her charity cases. You are trespassing on her private property." Brittany let out a high-pitched laugh bordering on hysteria. "This is a joke, right? Audrey does not have money. She buys her clothes at Target. She drives a Honda." Arthur closed the file with a snap. "That is called fiscal responsibility, Ms. Wilson. It is how she could afford to buy your childhood home while you were buying handbags. Now, Officer Miller, if you would please escort these individuals off the premises. They have 5 minutes to vacate the driveway before I press charges for criminal trespassing." Arthur Sterling did not give them time to process the shock. He flipped the page of the legal file, the sound sharp against the backdrop of the falling rain. He adjusted his glasses and began to read, his voice cutting through the storm with the precision of a surgeon. "Mr. Wilson, please refer to Clause 4, Section C of your lease agreement. It clearly states that the tenant shall engage in no behavior that defames, insults, or causes reputational harm to the landlord." Gavin wiped water from his face, blinking rapidly. "Defamation," he shouted. "I never defamed a company. I do not even know who runs this company." Arthur looked up, his expression deadpan. "The landlord is Ms. Audrey Wilson. Today at approximately 4 p.m., you and your family publicly humiliated the property owner in front of 200 witnesses. You applauded as property was damaged. You verbally assaulted her character. In doing so, you violated the moral conduct clause of your residency. Therefore, under the provisions of the contract you signed to avoid bankruptcy 2 years ago, the lease is terminated effective immediately. You are no longer tenants. You are intruders." The words hung in the wet air. My mother Joyce let out a low moan, clutching her chest. But Brittany did not care about the legalities. Her mind was fixed on one thing only. My Birkin. Brittany gasped, her eyes widening in panic. "My limited edition Hermes bag. It is in my bedroom. I left it on the bed. And my engagement ring. I took it off to wash my hands. She did not wait for permission." Panic overrode logic. Brittany bolted toward the front door, her ruined silver dress dragging in the mud, her heels slipping on the wet pavement. She ran with the desperation of someone trying to save their own life, because to Brittany those material possessions were her life. "I need my bag!" she shrieked, reaching for the handle. Officer Miller moved faster than a man of his size should have been able to. He stepped directly into her path, his broad frame blocking the entrance completely. He did not draw his weapon, but he placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, halting her momentum instantly. "Ma'am, stop right there," Officer Miller commanded, his voice, leaving no room for argument. Brittany crashed against his arm and stumbled back, nearly falling into the rose bushes. "Let me in!" she screamed, clawing at the air. "It is my house. My stuff is in there. You cannot keep me from my stuff." Officer Miller shook his head. "I am afraid I can. As of this moment, this property is under the control of the owner. Anything inside the residence is considered secured collateral until the eviction dispute is settled in court. You cannot enter. But it is a Hermes? Brittany wailed, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the rain and mascara. It cost $20,000. Arthur Sterling stepped forward, closing his briefcase with a final echoing snap. Then perhaps you should have thought about the value of your possessions before you destroyed your sister's wedding dress. The locks remain changed. The alarm is set. You have 30 days to petition the court for the retrieval of essential personal items. Until then, I suggest you find a hotel. That is, if you have a credit card that still works. Brittany collapsed onto the driveway, sobbing into her hands. Gavin and Joyce stood like statues, watching the police officers stand guard over the home they had built, the home they had lost, and the daughter they had underestimated. The raid was over. The castle had fallen. The drive away from the estate was the longest 10 minutes of their lives. Without access to their luxury SUVs, which remained locked in the garage, they had to call a rideshare service. But since their credit cards were declined on the app, Gavin had to use a prepaid debit card he had bought at a gas station years ago for online gambling. It only had $40 on it. That meant they could not go to the Four Seasons. They could not even go to the Marriott. They ended up at the Bluebird Motor Inn, a roadside motel with flickering neon lights and bulletproof glass at the check-in counter. Gavin stood at the window, counting out the last of the cash from his wallet to pay for a single room with 2 double beds. The night clerk, a teenager with headphones around his neck, did not care that Gavin was wearing a tuxedo or that he claimed to be a prominent businessman. He just took the crumpled $20 bills and slid a plastic keycard through the slot. Room 104, the clerk muttered. Checkout is at 11. No loud noises. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. The carpet was a suspicious shade of brown, and the air conditioning unit rattled like a dying engine. Joyce sat on the edge of the bed, refusing to touch the polyester bedspread. She looked around the cramped space, her face pale. I cannot stay here, Joyce whispered. It smells like mildew. Gavin. Call your brother. Ask him for a loan. We need to go to a real hotel. I can't. Gavin snapped, pacing the small strip of floor between the beds. He won't pick up. Audrey must have gotten to him too. She has probably poisoned the entire family against us by now. Brittany was standing in front of the cracked mirror, staring at her reflection. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was a disaster, and her silver dress was caked in mud. She looked at the cheap motel soap on the counter, and something inside her snapped. She spun around, her eyes wild with rage. This is your fault, Brittany screamed, pointing a shaking finger at her father. You told me you were rich. You told me the trust fund was endless. You lied. You have been broke for years, and you let Audrey pay for everything. Gavin stopped pacing. Watch your tone, young lady. I did what I did to protect you. I kept the lifestyle going so you wouldn't have to worry. Protect me. Brittany laughed, a harsh sound that grated against the thin walls. You sold our house to pay off gambling debts. You are a loser, Dad. You are a fraud. And you, Mom, you are just as bad. You knew, didn't you? You knew we were living on Audrey's charity, but you treated her like trash anyway, because you were too proud to admit she was the only successful one in this family. Stop it! Joyce cried, covering her ears. We did everything for you, Brittany. We gave you the best clothes, the best cars, the best life, and look where it got us. Brittany yelled, kicking the leg of the cheap wooden chair. I am in a motel room on my wedding night. My husband thinks I am a fraud. My friends are probably laughing at me on Instagram right now. I have nothing, and it is all because you two were too arrogant to be nice to the one person who actually had money. She grabbed a pillow from the bed and threw it against the wall. It hit a framed picture of a sad clown, shattering the glass. I hate you, Brittany sobbed, sliding down the wall to the floor. I hate both of you. Gavin sat down heavily on the other bed, burying his face in his hands. The sound of his daughter weeping and the rattle of the air conditioner were the only sounds in the room. For the first time, he realized that without money to gloss over the cracks, they were not a family. They were just 3 strangers trapped in a room, bound together by nothing but mutual resentment and a mountain of debt. The Bluebird Motor Inn room was small, but to Brittany it was just a set for her next performance. She sat in the corner where the peeling wallpaper wasn't visible, finding a blank beige background that looked vaguely neutral. She messed up her hair just enough to look distressed, but still photogenic. She adjusted the strap of her ruined dress to show a little more shoulder, a little more vulnerability. Then she opened Instagram. She had 500,000 followers who knew her as a lifestyle guru, a beacon of positivity and fashion. Tonight, they were going to know her as a victim. She hit the live button. Within seconds, the viewer count skyrocketed. 3,000, 10,000, 20,000. People loved a train wreck, and word of the wedding disaster had already leaked on local forums. Brittany looked into the camera lens, her eyes wide and glistening with practiced tears. "Hey guys," she whispered, her voice trembling perfectly. "I know I was supposed to be posting photos of my first dance right now. I know I promised you all a fairy tale, but I am currently sitting on the floor of a cheap motel because my sister decided to destroy my life." She paused to let the sympathy emojis roll in. The comments section was a blur of hearts and broken faces. "My sister Audrey has always been jealous of me." Brittany continued, wiping a tear that wasn't there. "But I never thought she would go this far." Today she didn't just pour wine on her own dress to cause a scene. She revealed that she has been embezzling money from my parents for years. She forged a deed to our family home. She kicked my elderly parents out on the street in the middle of a storm. My dad is 70 years old, guys. He is sleeping on a lumpy mattress right now because Audrey stole everything. The comments turned from sympathetic to angry. "Monster. Call the police. Sue her." "But that is not the worst part," Brittany said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "She has been cheating on Dante. I found out she has a boyfriend on the side, some guy she funnels the stolen money to. When I confronted her about it before the ceremony, she snapped. She evicted us to silence us. She is trying to ruin my reputation so no one believes the truth. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She took every sin she and our parents had committed and projected them onto me. She painted herself as the protective sister and me as the sociopathic villain. The internet did what the internet does best. It reacted without facts. Within minutes, my personal Instagram account, which I rarely used, was flooded with hate. "Snake, thief, elder abuser, I hope you rot." Brittany saw the numbers climbing. She saw the tide of public opinion turning in her favor. She leaned closer to the phone. "I don't know what we are going to do," she sobbed. "We have no home, no clothes, just each other. If anyone knows a good lawyer who works pro bono for fraud victims, please DM me. I just want justice for my mom and dad." She ended the live stream and let out a long, shaky breath. She looked over at Gavin and Joyce, who were watching her from the bed. There, Brittany said, her voice dry and devoid of the emotion she had just projected. "I just spun the narrative. By tomorrow morning, Audrey won't be able to show her face in public without getting spat on. Now let's see if that GoFundMe link I pinned starts getting donations." Back in our penthouse suite overlooking the San Francisco Bay, the atmosphere was charged with a very different kind of energy. While my family was imploding in a roadside motel room, my husband Dante was pacing the living room floor like a caged tiger. He held his tablet in one hand, watching Brittany's live stream with a look of cold professional fury. Dante was not a man who got angry easily. As one of the most feared mergers and acquisitions attorneys on the West Coast, he was used to high-stakes conflict. He was known in the legal world as the Grim Reaper of Wall Street, a man who could dismantle a Fortune 500 company before breakfast and negotiate a billion-dollar settlement by lunch. When Dante walked into a courtroom, opposing counsel usually started sweating. He protected his clients with ruthless efficiency, but when it came to me, his protective instinct was lethal. "This is defamation per se," Dante said, his voice low and dangerous. He tapped the screen where Brittany was currently sobbing about me stealing her inheritance. "She is accusing you of embezzlement and fraud to a global audience. I can have a cease and desist order served to her motel room within the hour. I can have her account suspended for harassment. I can file a civil suit for damages that will garnish her wages for the rest of her life. Let me destroy her, Audrey. Let me make the call. He reached for his phone, ready to unleash the full force of his firm on my sister. He had a team of 20 associates on standby who would work through the night to draft the paperwork. He wanted to bury her under a mountain of litigation so heavy she would never crawl out. I sat on the velvet sofa holding a cup of chamomile tea, watching the city lights reflect off the glass walls. I was calm. Strangely perfectly calm. No, I said softly. Dante stopped pacing. He looked at me, confusion knitting his brow. Audrey, did you hear what she just said? She called you a thief. She is ruining your reputation. We have to stop the bleeding. I set my tea down on the coffee table and stood up. I walked over to him and took the tablet from his hands. I looked at the screen. Brittany's viewer count was still climbing. She was feeding off the attention, growing bolder with every lie. If we sue her now, she wins, I explained, looking into Dante's dark eyes. If we silence her tonight, she becomes a martyr. She becomes the poor, defenseless victim who was crushed by her wealthy, evil sister's high-priced lawyers. The internet loves a underdog story, Dante. You know that. Dante clenched his jaw, the muscles feathering. So we just let her lie about you. No, I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. We let her talk. We let her scream. We let her build a narrative so specific, so detailed, and so completely false that when we finally pull the rug out, she won't just trip. She will shatter. I looked back at the screen. Brittany was now holding up her ringless finger, claiming I had pawned her engagement ring to pay off my gambling debts. It was a lie so easily disproven it was almost laughable. She is digging her own grave, Dante, I whispered. She is putting pure malice on permanent record. Every word she says right now increases the settlement value. Every lie she tells makes the truth that much more devastating when we release it. Dante looked at me and I saw the shift in his eyes. The protective husband faded and the ruthless strategist returned. He understood. He respected the long game. You want to bait the trap? He said, his tone shifting from anger to admiration. Exactly, I replied. Let her climb higher. Let her get all the way to the top of the mountain she is building on lies. The fall hurts much more when you fall from the summit. Dante nodded slowly. He took his phone and slid it back into his pocket. He walked over to the wet bar and poured himself a glass of scotch. Fine, he said, raising the glass in my direction. We wait. But the second she stops talking, I am ending her. I turned back to the window, watching the reflection of my own face. I did not look like a victim anymore. I looked like a hunter waiting for the prey to walk into the clearing. Let her enjoy her 15 minutes of fame, I said. Because tomorrow, I am going to introduce her to the receipts. The fallout from Brittany's livestream was immediate and catastrophic. I woke up the next morning, not to the sound of the ocean, but to the relentless buzzing of my work phone. As a crisis management expert, I made my living cleaning up other people's messes. My clients trusted me because I was invisible, discreet, and unimpeachable. But now I was the headline. The first email was from a tech conglomerate in Silicon Valley that I had consulted for 3 years. It was brief and brutal. Due to recent allegations regarding your personal conduct and financial integrity, we are suspending our retainer effective immediately. Then came the second email, a luxury hotel chain I represented. Then a third. By 9 a.m., I had lost 4 major contracts representing millions of dollars in annual revenue. My reputation, the fortress I had built brick by brick over a decade, was crumbling because my sister had convinced the internet that I was a thief. Dante stood by the window watching the notifications roll in on my iPad. His face was a mask of controlled fury. He knew that in our world, perception was reality. Even if the accusations were false, the stink of scandal was enough to scare away corporate clients. But the final blow did not come via email. It came via a morning talk show. Dante turned up the volume on the television. Breaking news, the anchor announced. We have an exclusive interview with the mother of the bride from the viral Wedding from Hell video. And there she was, my mother Joyce. She was sitting in the lobby of the cheap motel wearing a faded cardigan that I knew she had pulled out of the donation bin to look sympathetic. She was not wearing her usual heavy makeup. She looked frail, elderly, and devastated. It was the performance of a lifetime. The reporter leaned in, her voice dripping with concern. Mrs. Wilson, your daughter Brittany claims that your other daughter Audrey stole the deed to your home and evicted you. Is this true? Joyce looked directly into the camera. Her chin trembled. It breaks a mother's heart to say this, but yes. Audrey has always been a troubled child. We tried to get her help for years. We let her handle our finances because we wanted her to feel useful, to feel like she was part of the family's success. We never imagined she was siphoning off our retirement funds to buy properties in her own name. The reporter gasped. So you are saying she stole your home? Joyce wiped away a fake tear. She tricked my husband into signing papers he thought were for insurance. Now at our age we are homeless. We have nothing. I just pray Audrey finds it in her heart to stop this cruelty and give us back our keys. We forgive her. We just want to go home. I stared at the screen. I felt a physical blow to my chest. My mother was not just lying, she was rewriting history. She was taking the financial abuse they had inflicted on me for years and projecting it onto me. She was using her status as a mother to validate Brittany's lies, turning a family dispute into a criminal accusation. Dante turned off the TV. The silence in the room was deafening. That is it, he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. They just crossed the line from defamation to criminal conspiracy. They are destroying your livelihood to solicit sympathy donations. Audrey, we cannot wait anymore. I stood up. The sadness was gone. The hesitation was gone. I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. You are right, I said. They wanted a public trial. Let's give them the evidence. Pull the security footage from the vineyard and get the forensic accountant on the line. It is time to release the Kraken. The secure server portal for the vineyard estate loaded on my laptop screen. It asked for a two-factor authentication code which pinged immediately to my phone. My family, in their infinite arrogance, had assumed the vineyard was just another service provider they could bully. They had screamed at the manager and mistreated the waitstaff, never once suspecting that the venue was part of the Golden Vine Hospitality Group. And they certainly did not know that Velvet Key, LLC, my company, owned a 30% controlling stake in that group. To them, I was just a disgruntled bride. To the security system, I was the highest-ranking administrator with root access to every camera on the property. I typed in my credentials. The screen filled with a grid of camera feeds. I filtered the search by date and time, narrowing it down to the morning of the wedding. Dante stood behind me, his hand resting on the back of my chair, watching in silence as I became a digital detective in my own life. I need the bridal suite balcony first, I said, clicking on the file labeled Camera 4B. The video loaded in high-definition 4K resolution. The timestamp read 11 a.m., exactly 1 hour before the ceremony. The image was crisp. There was Brittany. She was wearing her silk robe, holding a wine glass filled with water. She was not nervous. She was not crying about cold feet. She was laughing. I watched as she practiced the motion. She stepped forward, feigned a trip, and splashed the water onto the railing. She did it again, and again. Her bridesmaids were clapping, coaching her on the angle. Look at that, Dante whispered, pointing at the screen. She premeditated it. This is not negligence. This is malice. I switched to the camera inside the holding room. This one had audio. I turned up the volume. My mother's voice cut through the speakers, clear as a bell. Make sure you get it right on the center of the bodice, Joyce said, adjusting Brittany's veil. We do not want just a few drops. If we ruin the dress completely, she will have to leave to change, and we can take the family portraits without her. Brittany giggled. Don't worry, Mom. I will make sure she looks like a disaster. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Hearing them say it, hearing the casual cruelty in their voices was worse than the act itself. They had planned my humiliation over morning coffee. I pulled the final clip. The altar. The angle from the guest's perspective showed a stumble, but the security camera was mounted high on the trellis looking down. From this bird's eye view, the truth was undeniable. You could see Brittany look down at my feet. You could see her deliberately plant her heel on my veil to pin me in place. You could see the calculated flick of her wrist. There was no slip. She threw the wine at me. I compiled the clips into a single video file. I synced the audio. I did not add a voiceover. I did not add sad music. The raw footage was damning enough. It showed a conspiracy. It showed a mother instructing her daughter to assault her sister. It showed the true face of the family that was currently playing the victim on national television. I opened my social media accounts. I opened the press release portal Dante's firm used for official statements. I uploaded the file. The progress bar moved slowly. 20%, 50%. Dante squeezed my shoulder. Once you press post, there is no going back, he said. This will destroy them. Destroy. I looked at the freeze frame of my mother's face, twisted in a sneer as she plotted against me. They destroyed themselves? Dante, I replied. I am just turning on the lights. I hit publish. The file name was simple: The Truth Behind the Stain. Within seconds, the notifications began to explode. The counterattack had begun. The internet is a volatile beast. It loves a villain, but it loves the exposed liar even more. I watched the view count on the video. It started at 0, then 10, then 1,000. Within an hour, it was a forest fire that no amount of damage control could extinguish. The video, titled The Truth Behind the Stain, did not need a caption. The footage spoke for itself. First, the world saw Britney in the bridal suite practicing the trip like an actress rehearsing for a play. They heard her giggling about ruining my dress. Then they saw the ceremony. The high-angle camera captured the deliberate stomp on my veil. It captured the wrist flick. It captured the smirk that Britney thought was hidden from the guests, but was crystal clear in 4K resolution. The audio was the nail in the coffin. Her whisper, "I just did everyone a favor," was audible enough to send chills down the spine of every viewer. But the part that truly turned the stomach of the public was the reaction of my parents. Seeing two grown adults stand up and applaud the humiliation of their own daughter turned them from sympathetic elderly victims into absolute pariahs in seconds. The comment section, which had been filled with hate for me just hours ago, flipped instantly. Then came the bonus footage I had included at the end. Clips of Gavin screaming at a 19-year-old waiter for not pouring wine fast enough. Clips of Joyce calling the venue manager a peasant because the napkins were the wrong shade of white. It dismantled their poor, helpless, homeless narrative piece by piece. They were not victims. They were bullies who had finally run out of money. The hashtag Evil Sister began to trend on Twitter. Then it hit #1 worldwide. TikTok users were already making duets analyzing Britney's fake tears in her live stream side by side with her malicious grin in the security footage. The internet sleuths went to work. They found the price of the wine she threw. They found the cost of the dress. They did the math and realized I was the one who had been bankrolling their cruelty. Britney tried to stop the bleeding. She deleted her live stream. She turned off comments on her posts. But the internet is forever. Her follower count, which she had spent years cultivating, began to freefall. She lost 50,000 followers in the first 30 minutes, then 100,000. Brands that had sent her free products began tagging her in public statements, disavowing her behavior and demanding their items back. Dante sat next to me, scrolling through the feed with a look of grim satisfaction. "Look at this," he said, handing me his phone. It was a tweet from the tech conglomerate that had fired me that morning. It read simply, "We apologize for rushing to judgment. We stand against bullying in all forms and would like to open a dialogue with Ms. Wilson to reinstate her contract." I watched the notifications roll in. Apologies from friends who had blocked me. Messages from family members claiming they knew Britney was lying all along. I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I was carrying. I didn't just clear my name, I watched the world finally see my family for exactly who they were. The court of public opinion had reached a verdict and it was guilty on all counts. The security footage proved their cruelty, but I needed to prove their fraud. Britney had built an entire career on the lie that she was a self-made heiress, a woman who worked hard for her luxury lifestyle. Her 500,000 followers worshipped her because they believed she was authentic. They bought the waist trainers she promoted and the skincare she claimed to use, all because they wanted to be just like her. It was time to show them that the Britney they idolized was nothing more than a product I had purchased. I opened the folder labeled Medical and Personal Expenses on the Velvet Key server. Dante watched as I selected 3 specific PDF files. These were not just receipts. They were smoking guns. The first document was an invoice from the most exclusive plastic surgery clinic in Beverly Hills. Dated 4 years ago. Procedure: rhinoplasty and chin augmentation. Cost: $14,000. Britney had pinned a tweet to her profile just last week, claiming she had never gone under the knife, attributing her perfect profile to good genes and contouring. I dragged the file into the upload window. The second document was even more damaging. It was the financing agreement for her breast augmentation. She had begged me for the money, crying that she felt insecure, and I had paid it directly to the surgeon because I felt sorry for her. On Instagram, she claimed her figure was the result of a specific workout program she was selling for $49 a month. I dragged that file next to the first one. The final blow was the lease agreement for her white Mercedes G-Wagon. Every Monday, Britney posted a photo of the steering wheel with the caption, "Rise and Grind." She told her followers she bought it with her first big brand deal. The document clearly showed the monthly lease payments of $2,000 being deducted from my personal checking account, not hers. I titled the post, "The Cost of Perfection." I wrote a simple caption: "You can fix a nose, but you cannot fix a personality. Swipe to see who really funds the self-made lifestyle." I hit post. The reaction was instantaneous and brutal. This time, it wasn't just outrage, it was mockery. The internet hates a liar more than anything. Side-by-side photos of Britney's old nose versus her new one started flooding the timeline. People who had bought her workout program demanded refunds, realizing her body was bought, not built. The hashtag fraud started trending next to Evil Sister. I watched as her sponsorship deals evaporated in real time. A major athletic wear company commented on her latest post, saying they were terminating their partnership due to misrepresentation of values. A skincare brand issued a statement distancing themselves. Britney wasn't just losing followers now, she was losing her identity. The rich kid persona she had curated for a decade was exposed as a hollow shell, funded by the sister she had just tried to destroy. She was not a princess, she was a charity case. And now the whole world had the receipts. 72 hours in a roadside motel is enough to break anyone. But for my family, it stripped away the last veneer of their humanity and left only raw, starving desperation. The room was a disaster zone of empty vending machine wrappers and despair. Britney sat on the edge of the bed, her thumb hovering over Kyle's name on her phone screen. She had called him 40 times in the last hour. Finally, on the 41st try, he answered. But it was not the warm, reassuring voice of a new husband. It was the cold, distant tone of a man protecting his own inheritance. "Kyle, thank God," Britney sobbed into the receiver. "You have to come get us. This place is horrible. Dad is losing his mind. Please, just bring the car." There was a long pause on the other line. When Kyle spoke, his voice sounded like it was coming from a different planet. "I cannot do that, Britney. My parents are furious about the videos Audrey posted. The fraud allegations are serious. Their lawyers advised me to distance myself until the investigation clears. I need space." "Space," Britney screamed. "We are married. We have been married for 3 days, and for 2 of them, you have been trending on Twitter as a con artist," Kyle replied. "I will call you next week. Do not come to the house. The security codes have been changed." The line went dead. Britney threw the phone across the room. It bounced off the cheap carpet, mirroring the way her life was bouncing off rock bottom. Gavin was not listening to her meltdown. He was staring at the mini fridge, which was empty except for a single bottle of water. He was hungry, he was tired, and he was realizing that his social circle had completely abandoned him. His calls to his golfing buddies went straight to voicemail. His emails to his business partners bounced back. Then his phone buzzed. It was a text message. The name on the screen made his heart stop. Audrey. Gavin grabbed the phone with trembling hands. Joyce leaned over his shoulder, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. Gavin read the message out loud, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. It says, "I am tired of the fighting. The public scrutiny is hurting my business too. I am willing to offer a settlement to end this quietly. Meet me at Le Jardin at 6 p.m. I will release $2 million from the Grandmother's Trust Fund to Brittany as a wedding gift provided you and Mom sign a formal apology letter retracting your statements." Joyce gasped, clutching Gavin's arm. $2 million. That solves everything. We can pay the venue. We can get a hotel. We can sue the press. Gavin let out a low, triumphant laugh. I knew it. I knew she would crack. She cannot handle the pressure. She is scared we will reveal more family secrets, so she is trying to buy our silence. Brittany looked up from the floor, her eyes lighting up with greed. $2 million, she whispered. That is enough to buy a new G-Wagon and start over in LA. They did not see the trap. They did not ask why I would offer money after I had just destroyed them. They only saw what they wanted to see. A check. Tell her yes. Gavin commanded, his arrogance returning in a rush. Tell her we will meet her, but act reluctant. Make her think she is lucky we are even agreeing to talk. He typed the reply, sealing his own fate with every keystroke. He thought he was walking into a negotiation. He had no idea he was walking into a confession booth. Le Jardin was a fortress of old money elegance, the kind of place where the lighting was dim enough to hide wrinkles and the menu had no prices. I sat at a corner table, a glass of sparkling water untouched in front of me, watching the entrance. I wore a sharp black blazer armor for the final battle. At exactly 6 o'clock, they walked in. The transformation was almost impressive. They had clearly spent the last hour in the motel bathroom trying to scrub away the stench of failure. Gavin had managed to press his tuxedo jacket, though the wine stain was still faintly visible if you looked hard enough. Joyce had pinned her hair back, hiding the fact that it hadn't been washed in 2 days. Brittany had applied a thick layer of foundation to cover the stress breakouts on her chin. They walked with their heads high, channeling every ounce of entitlement they had left. They spotted me. Immediately, their faces shifted. The anger and desperation vanished, replaced by a performance of familial concern, so saccharine it made my teeth ache. "Audrey, sweetheart," my mother cooed, rushing over with her arms wide open. She hugged me, a stiff, awkward embrace that smelled of cheap motel soap and deceit. "We have been so worried about you. Are you eating? You look thin." Gavin pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down, smoothing his tie. He looked at me not with anger, but with the condescending pity of a patriarch forgiving a wayward child. "We are glad you came to your senses, Audrey," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential baritone. "This whole feud has been a misunderstanding. We know you didn't mean to lock us out. You were emotional. We forgive you." Brittany sat next to him, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her nails, usually perfect, were chipped. "Yeah," she added, her voice trembling with feigned emotion. "I mean, sisters fight, right? I know I said some things on Instagram, but I was just hurt. I love you, Audrey. I just want us to be a family again." I looked at them. 3 sharks smiling at a seal. They truly believed I had broken. They thought the pressure of the bad press had forced me to crawl back to them. They didn't see me as a threat. They saw me as an ATM that had temporarily malfunctioned and was now ready to dispense cash again. "I appreciate you coming," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I know the last few days have been difficult." "Difficult," Gavin chuckled, waving his hand dismissively. "It was a character-building exercise. But let's focus on the solution. You mentioned the trust fund release. I think that is a very mature decision. It will help Brittany get settled and of course help your mother and me get back into the house so we can stop this nonsense." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't apologize for the years of neglect. He just pivoted straight to the money. Joyce leaned in, her eyes glistening with fake tears. "We just want to put this behind us, honey. Sign the papers, transfer the funds, and we will issue a joint statement saying this was all a prank for a reality show pilot. We will clear your name. We will save you." It was repulsive. They were offering to sell their integrity to save my reputation, unaware that they had no integrity left to sell. They were performing love, but all I could see was the hunger in their eyes. They were starving dogs looking at a steak, wagging their tails, not out of affection, but out of appetite. I reached into my bag and pulled out a blue folder. The greedy glint in Brittany's eyes flared like a match in a dark room. "I have the paperwork right here," I said. Gavin practically snatched the pen from the table. "Excellent. Let's get this signed. We have a reservation at the Ritz for tonight." He was so eager to sign his name on the dotted line, so eager to claim his prize, that he didn't even bother to read the first paragraph. He didn't notice that the folder wasn't just a settlement agreement. It was a trap. Gavin reached for the pen, his eyes locked on the promise of salvation, but I placed my hand firmly over the document. The warmth of his greed seemed to radiate across the table, but I needed to freeze it in place. "Not yet," I said, my voice steady and unyielding. "Before we get to the settlement, there is a condition." I flipped the blue folder open to the second page. It was a single sheet of paper dense with legal text, but the header was bold and unmistakable. "Affidavit of admission regarding the estate of Eleanor Wilson." Gavin squinted at the document, his brow furrowing. "What is this?" he asked, his tone sharpening. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. 5 years ago, Grandma's pension fund was drained. $300,000 vanished overnight. You told the entire family I made a risky stock market bet that collapsed. You told Grandma I was incompetent. You let her die believing I had lost her life savings." Gavin scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "That is ancient history, Audrey. She is dead. Why are we digging up the past?" "Because I never lost that money, Dad," I said. "You did. You took it to cover a margin call on a bad real estate deal in Nevada. You stole from your own mother and framed your daughter to cover your tracks." Gavin looked around the restaurant nervously. "Keep your voice down. That is a serious accusation." I tapped the paper. "It is the truth. And if you want the $2 million from the trust today, you are going to sign this. It is a formal admission that you embezzled the funds and falsely accused me." Gavin stared at the paper as if it were radioactive. "You want me to sign a confession? Are you crazy? This could be used against me." I shrugged, feigning indifference. "It is a private document, Dad. It is just for me. I need closure. I need to know that the record is set straight between us. No one else has to see it. It is just a symbolic gesture to clear my conscience before I release the money to Brittany." He hesitated. The survival instinct in him was screaming that this was a trap, but the desperation was louder. He looked at Brittany. She was practically vibrating with impatience. "Just sign it, Dad," Brittany hissed, kicking him under the table. "Who cares what it says? Grandma is gone. She doesn't know. Audrey just wants to feel morally superior. We need that money for the hotel. We need it for my life. Don't ruin this for me because of your pride." Joyce chimed in, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Gavin, please. It is just a piece of paper. Whatever makes Audrey happy. Think about the Ritz. Think about the hot shower." Gavin looked at the check I had placed visibly on the corner of the table. $2 million. It was freedom. It was his reputation restored. It was his life back. Against that, a confession to a dead woman seemed like a small price to pay. "Fine," Gavin muttered, picking up the pen. "You always were too sensitive, Audrey. If this makes you sleep better at night, so be it. But this stays in the family." "Of course," I said, watching him closely. He pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed dark and permanent. He signed his name, dated it, and pushed the paper back to me with a look of arrogant dismissal. "There," he said. "You have your pound of flesh. Now give us the check." I took the document and slid it carefully into my bag. I looked at his signature, the final nail in the coffin he had built for himself. He thought he had just bought his freedom. He had no idea he had just signed his own prison sentence. Gavin's hand hovered over the paper he had just signed. The ink was still glistening under the dim restaurant lights. The reality of what he had done washed over him like a bucket of ice water. He did not push it across the table immediately. Instead, he slammed his palm down over the signature, trapping the document against the white tablecloth. His eyes darted between me and the paper, the color draining from his face as the adrenaline of greed faded and the cold logic of self-preservation kicked in. "Wait," Gavin said, his voice dropping to a harsh, vibrating whisper. "Wait a minute. I need to think about this. This isn't just a letter to soothe your hurt feelings, Audrey. This is a confession to a Class B felony, embezzlement, elder abuse. There is no statute of limitations on fraud of this magnitude." He looked up at me, searching for the submissive, stuttering daughter he used to command, but he found only a mirror reflecting his own sins. "If this gets out," Gavin continued, panic rising in his chest, "I lose my license to trade. I lose my standing at the club. I could go to prison, Audrey. You wouldn't do that. You are my daughter. You wouldn't actually put your own father behind bars over money." I did not answer. I simply took a slow sip of my sparkling water, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing. I let him sweat. Joyce leaned in, her eyes wide and manic. She looked at the check sitting on the corner of the table, then at her husband. She did not see the legal danger. She only saw the soft thread count of the sheets at the Ritz-Carlton. "Gavin, stop being paranoid," Joyce hissed, grabbing his arm. "Look at her. She is crying out for attention. She just wants to hold something over us so she feels powerful. She won't use it. She is a Wilson. We do not destroy our own." She dug her nails into his expensive suit jacket. "Sign it and give it to her," Joyce demanded. "Do you want to go back to that motel? Do you want to sleep on that lumpy mattress again while the world laughs at us? I refuse to live like a beggar when there is $2 million sitting right there." Brittany rolled her eyes. Her patience completely evaporated. She was already mentally spending the money on a first-class flight to Paris. "Oh my God, Dad, you are such a coward," Brittany snapped. "She is offering us a lifeline. She feels guilty about the wedding disaster, obviously. This is her way of paying us off without admitting she was wrong to humiliate us. Just give her the stupid paper." "But it is a crime," Gavin muttered, his hand trembling on the document. "It is only a crime if she reports it," Brittany argued, her voice dripping with disdain. "And she won't. Because if she sends you to jail, she drags the family name through the mud even more. She needs us just as much as we need her money. She is bluffing, Dad. Call her bluff." Gavin looked at the check. The numbers were crisp and black. $2 million. It was enough to erase the debts. It was enough to silence the creditors. It was enough to buy back his dignity. The greed in his heart wrestled with his fear, and as always, greed won. He convinced himself that I was still the little girl who sought his approval. He convinced himself that blood was thicker than justice. He looked at me one last time. "You promise this is just for you?" he asked, his voice weak. "You promise this stays in this folder?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I promise I will do exactly what is necessary," I said. He heard what he wanted to hear. He slid the paper across the tablecloth. He traded his freedom for a check that he didn't know was about to bounce in the most spectacular way possible. "There," Gavin said, sitting back and buttoning his jacket. "It is done. Now we are leaving." He stood up, snatching the check from the table with a trembling hand. Joyce and Brittany scrambled up beside him, clutching their purses, looking at me with triumphant smirks. They thought they had won. They thought they had outsmarted me. They walked out of Le Jardin believing they were rich again, leaving me alone with the one piece of paper that would ensure they never saw a dime of that money. The ink on the check was barely dry in Brittany's imagination before she snatched it from her father's trembling hand. She held the slip of paper up to the light, her eyes manic with triumph. To her, this piece of paper was not just money, it was a restoration of her world. It was the G-Wagon. It was the first-class tickets. It was the ability to look down on people again. She brought it close to her face, ready to kiss the signature line, ready to celebrate their victory over the sister she despised. "We won." Brittany squealed, doing a little shimmy in the middle of the restaurant. I knew she would cave. "I told you, Dad. I told you she was weak." $2 million. We are back in business. Gavin buttoned his jacket, his chest puffing out with renewed arrogance. He looked at me with a sneer. You made the right choice, Audrey. We will accept this as your apology. Don't expect us to invite you to dinner anytime soon, though. We have standards. They turned to leave, the check fluttering in Brittany's hand. Wait, Brittany said, stopping abruptly. Her brow furrowed. She rubbed her thumb over the paper. She rubbed it again, harder this time. The texture was wrong. It was not the heavy cotton bond paper of a certified bank check. It was smooth. It was flimsy. It felt like standard office printer paper. She looked closer at the watermark. It was slightly pixelated. She looked at the bank logo. The colors were a little too bright, a little too flat. Brittany froze. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. She turned the check over. The back was blank white. No security screen. No endorsement line. It is a photocopy, she whispered, her voice trembling. What? Gavin snapped, spinning around. It is a color photocopy, Brittany screamed, crumpling the paper in her fist. It is fake. It is a prop. She gave us a piece of printer paper. Gavin looked at me, his face turning a violent shade of purple. He looked like he was about to have a stroke. You little witch, is this a game to you? You think you can trick us? I will drag you to court for fraud. I will have your license. I will destroy you. I remained seated, crossing my legs calmly. You cannot sue me for a prop, Dad. And you certainly cannot sue me for fraud when you just signed a confession admitting to a felony. Gavin lunged toward the table, reaching for the blue folder I had put in my bag. Give me that paper back, he roared. Sit down. Gavin, a deep voice boomed from the wall behind me. The heavy oak door to the private VIP dining room, which had been closed the entire time, swung open. My family froze. They expected a waiter. They expected a manager. Instead, 3 men in dark suits stepped out. The man in the lead was Detective Vance from the Economic Crimes Unit. I had introduced him to Dante at a charity gala 3 years ago. He was not smiling. He was holding a recording device in his hand, the red light still blinking. Gavin Wilson. Detective Vance said, stepping into the main dining area. I am Detective Vance with the State Financial Crimes Division. We have been listening to this conversation for the last 20 minutes. Gavin stumbled back, knocking over a chair. Police? What is this? This is entrapment. You cannot use this. Actually, we can, Vance replied, holding up a warrant. We obtained a surveillance warrant based on the evidence your daughter provided regarding the theft of the Eleanor Wilson estate. We just needed you to confirm the intent, and you just did, loud and clear. 2 uniformed officers stepped in from the main entrance, blocking the exit. The restaurant went silent. The other diners watched in shock as the arrogant family that had walked in like royalty was suddenly surrounded. I stood up and picked up my bag. I looked at Brittany, who was holding the crumpled fake check, tears of rage streaming down her face. I told you, Brittany, I said softly. The check was never real. But the prison sentence is. Detective Vance pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click echoed through the room. Gavin Wilson, you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and elder abuse. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut cut through the elegant atmosphere of Le Jardin like a gunshot. The diners who had been whispering about the commotion now fell into a stunned silence. Gavin Wilson, a man who had spent his entire life posturing as a titan of industry, was now bent over a table, his face pressed into the starched white cloth, his hands secured behind his back by a uniformed officer. You cannot do this. Gavin sputtered, his voice muffled against the linen. I am a pillar of this community. I know the mayor. I play golf with the chief of police. Take these things off me immediately. This is a misunderstanding. It was a family dispute. Detective Vance did not blink. He leaned down, his voice calm and professional. You are right, Mr. Wilson. It was a family dispute. Until you signed a sworn affidavit admitting to stealing $300,000 from a vulnerable elderly woman. That made it a felony. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. My mother. Joyce stood frozen, her hands clutching her pearls, watching her world disintegrate. She looked at the police, then at me, and finally her desperate gaze landed on Dante. Dante had stepped out of the VIP room behind the detective. He looked impeccable in his charcoal suit, a sharp contrast to the chaotic scene unfolding before him. Joyce lunged at him, grabbing the lapel of his jacket with frantic clawing fingers. "Dante, do something!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You are a lawyer. You are the best lawyer in the city. Tell them this is illegal. Tell them they cannot arrest him without a trial. You have to represent him. He is your father-in-law. We are family." Dante looked down at her hand on his suit. He did not shove her away. He simply reached up and peeled her fingers off his lapel one by one with the same distaste one might show when removing a leech. He stepped back, creating a barrier of cold, professional distance. "I cannot represent him, Joyce," Dante said, his voice deep and resonating through the room. "And I certainly would not. But you have to." Joyce cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining the makeup she had applied so carefully for this meeting. "We cannot afford a criminal defense attorney. You know we have no money. You have to help us, for Audrey's sake." Dante let out a short, humorless laugh. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking from the weeping woman to the man being hauled to his feet by the officers. "Let me be clear," Dante said, pitching his voice so that Gavin could hear him too. "The document Gavin just signed is a confession to financial elder abuse under Penal Code Section 368. In the state of California, given the amount stolen exceeds $100,000, and considering the aggravating factor that he blamed his innocent daughter for the crime, the sentencing guidelines are severe." He paused, letting the weight of the law settle over them. "He is not looking at a fine, Joyce. He is looking at a mandatory minimum of 2 to 4 years in state prison. And since he just confessed to a detective from the Economic Crimes Unit on a recorded wire, no lawyer on earth can save him. Not me, not anyone." Gavin turned his head as the officers began to drag him toward the exit. His eyes were wide with terror. "Dante, please," he begged. "I am an old man. I cannot go to prison." Dante looked his father-in-law in the eye, his expression completely void of sympathy. "You should have thought about that before you stole from a dead woman and tried to destroy your living daughter," Dante replied coldly. The officers pushed Gavin forward. The humiliating procession moved through the restaurant, past the shocked patrons, past the untouched wine glasses. Joyce collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Brittany stood motionless, clutching the fake check, watching as the only man who had ever catered to her delusions was led away in silver bracelets. The check for $2 million was worthless paper, but the justice served was priceless. The sirens were fading into the distance, taking my father and his arrogance to the county lockup. The restaurant manager was frantically trying to calm the other diners, offering free champagne, to apologize for the scene. My mother Joyce sat slumped in her chair, a weeping mess of ruined mascara and broken dreams. Brittany stood frozen, clutching the fake check in one hand, and her phone in the other, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. That was when the heavy oak doors opened one last time. Kyle walked in. He looked pale and anxious, scanning the room until his eyes landed on the wreckage of his in-laws. He had not come to save them. He had come because Dante had texted him 10 minutes ago with a message that simply said, "Come to Le Jardin if you want to save your financial future." Brittany saw him and her face lit up with a desperate, frantic hope. She dropped the crumpled paper and lunged toward him. "Kyle," she sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck. "Oh, thank God. It was horrible. Audrey called the police. They took Dad away. You have to get us out of here. Take me to your parents' house. I cannot handle this anymore. I need to lie down. The baby needs to rest." She played the pregnancy card immediately, her trump card the only reason Kyle had married her in such a rush. She pressed her stomach against him, looking up with wide, tear-filled eyes. Kyle stood stiffly. He did not hug her back. He reached up and unhooked her arms from his neck, stepping back to create a distinct gap between them. Brittany looked confused. "Kyle, what are you doing?" Dante stepped forward. He held a manila envelope in his hand. It was not a legal document this time. It was a medical one. The logo on the corner was from the same OBGYN clinic Brittany had visited the week before the wedding. "You should look at this," Kyle Dante said, extending the envelope. "We subpoenaed these records as part of the fraud investigation into Brittany's expenses. It turns out her medical bills revealed a timeline that does not quite match the fairy tale she told you." Kyle took the envelope. His hands were shaking. Brittany's eyes went wide with true terror. "No," she screamed, lunging for the packet. "Kyle, do not open that. It is private. It is just medical stuff." Dante blocked her path with a single step, shielding Kyle as he ripped the seal open. Kyle pulled out the ultrasound report. He stared at the black and white image, then at the typed notes at the bottom. "Read the gestational age," Kyle Dante instructed, his voice clinical and cold. Kyle squinted at the paper. "Estimated gestational age, 14 weeks. He looked up, his brow furrowing as he did the mental math. 14 weeks, he whispered. "That is 3.5 months. He looked at Brittany. "We met at the gallery opening 8 weeks ago. We have only been together for 2 months. Brittany stammered, backing away. "The doctors are wrong. You know how they are. They estimate. It is not an exact science. It is your baby, Kyle. I swear." Dante shook his head. "Actually, obstetrics is a very precise science at this stage, Brittany. And the DNA test we are going to request during the annulment proceedings will confirm it. But you do not need a test to know the truth. You just need to check your Venmo history." Dante pulled a second sheet of paper from the envelope. "Here are transfers you made 3 months ago to a man named Marcus. He is a personal trainer at the Equinox Gym where you pretend to work out. The memos on the payments are quite romantic." Kyle looked at the transfer log. He looked at the date. He looked at the lie that was standing in front of him in a ruined silver dress. "You trapped me," Kyle said, his voice quiet and broken. "You knew you were pregnant with some gym rat's kid and you needed a rich husband to pay for it. So you found me." "It wasn't like that," Brittany cried, reaching for him again. "I love you, Kyle. Marcus meant nothing. He is a nobody." Kyle recoiled as if she were radioactive. He threw the papers on the floor. "Do not touch me," he spat. "Do not ever contact me again. I am calling my lawyer. The marriage is over." He turned on his heel and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Brittany stood alone in the center of the room, abandoned by her father, exposed by her sister, and divorced by her husband, all in the span of 20 minutes. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Kyle stopped at the heavy glass revolving doors. He did not leave. Not yet. He turned back, his face hard as stone, stripping away the last remnant of the gentle fiancé he had been. He walked back to Brittany, who was shivering in the center of the room. She looked up, a flicker of pathetic hope igniting in her eyes. She thought he was coming back to forgive her. She thought her tears had worked. Kyle reached out and grabbed her left hand. He did not hold it gently. He gripped her wrist with the cold efficiency of a repo man reclaiming an asset. "The ring," Kyle said. It was a command, not a question. Brittany pulled back, clutching her hand to her chest. "No, you gave it to me. It is mine. It is my engagement ring." Kyle laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "It is a Montgomery family heirloom from the 1920s. It belongs to a Montgomery wife. Not a fraud carrying a personal trainer's baby. You are not my wife, Brittany. You are a bad investment." He grabbed her fingers. He did not care that he was hurting her. He twisted the ring. Brittany yelped in pain. With a final forceful tug, he slid the 3-carat diamond off her finger. Her hand looked bare, naked, cheap. "My lawyers will send the annulment papers to the motel," Kyle said, slipping the ring into his pocket. "Do not bother reading them. You have no grounds to contest." He turned and walked out. The door spun shut behind him, sealing her fate. Brittany stood there. The silence in the restaurant was suffocating. She looked at her empty finger. She looked at her mother, who was uselessly sobbing into a napkin. She looked at the empty chair where her father had been handcuffed and dragged away. She had nothing, no money, no fame, no husband, no father. Her entire world, built on lies and other people's money, had evaporated in the span of an hour. Then she looked at me. I was standing by the table, calmly clasping my purse. I looked untouched, I looked victorious. Something inside Brittany snapped, the last thread of her sanity severed. She let out a scream that sounded more like a wounded animal than a human being. You! She shrieked, her eyes rolling back in her head. You did this. You took everything from me. She lunged. She did not run like a socialite. She charged like a wild beast, her fingers curled into claws aiming for my eyes. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to make me bleed to match the hemorrhage of her own life. I did not flinch. I did not move. I did not even blink. Two men in black suits stepped out from the shadows of the pillars. They were my private security detail hired 3 days ago for this exact moment. The lead guard, a massive man named Cole, intercepted her effortlessly. He did not strike her. He simply used her own momentum against her. He stepped into her path, blocked her arm with a forearm of steel, and shoved her back with a solid, controlled force. Brittany flew backward. Her high heels slipped on the polished marble floor. She crashed down hard, her limbs tangling in the ruined silver fabric of her dress. She hit the ground with a sickening thud, sliding across the cold tiles. She lay there gasping for breath, hair plastered to her face, looking up at the ceiling. She was on the floor of a restaurant she couldn't afford, wearing a dress she hadn't paid for, crying over a life she never deserved. I walked over and stood above her. I looked down, not with hate, but with the distant pity one feels for a roadkill. Stay down, Brittany, I said softly. You have finally reached the level where you belong. The gavel struck the sounding block with a finality that shattered the last remnants of the Wilson family dynasty. The sound echoed off the mahogany walls of the Superior Court, ringing in my ears like a church bell. Judge Harrison did not look down with pity at the man standing before him in a wrinkled suit. He looked down with the cold indifference of the law. Gavin Wilson, you have been found guilty of grand theft, embezzlement, and elder abuse, the judge stated, his voice booming through the silent courtroom. You preyed on the vulnerability of your own mother and scapegoated your daughter to cover your crimes. I am sentencing you to 5 years in state prison with a minimum of 30 months to be served before eligibility for parole. You are remanded to custody immediately. My father did not scream. He did not fight. He simply slumped forward, the air leaving his lungs as if he had been punched. The bailiffs moved in, snapping the steel cuffs around his wrists. He looked back at the gallery, searching for someone to save him, but there was no one. I sat in the back row watching the man who had terrorized my childhood be led away through the side door. He was no longer a patriarch. He was inmate number 8940. With the patriarch gone, the house of cards collapsed completely. The asset forfeiture unit moved with terrifying speed. They seized everything to pay back the estate and the mounting legal fees. The cars, the jewelry, the furniture, even the designer clothes. My mother Joyce was left with nothing but 2 suitcases of clothes and a bus ticket. There were no friends to take her in. The social circle she had cultivated for 40 years evaporated the moment the verdict was read. She was forced into emergency social housing on the grim side of the city, a place where the sirens never stopped wailing. I drove past her building once just to see. It was a gray, crumbling concrete block with barred windows. I saw her sitting on the front stoop, clutching a plastic grocery bag. She was staring at a cracked pavement, wearing a coat that was fraying at the seams. She looked small. She looked old. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who had traded her daughter's love for a lifestyle she could not afford, and who now had neither. But the cruelest fate was reserved for Brittany. The internet never forgives, and the job market checks background references. With a fraud scandal attached to her name, no corporate office would hire her. No brand would work with her. She had no degree, no skills, and a mountain of debt from the lawsuit settlements. She found work at a 24-hour diner off the interstate, the kind of place where the coffee is burnt and the customers are angry. I went there late one Tuesday night. I sat in a booth in the corner wearing sunglasses. Brittany walked out of the kitchen. She was wearing a stain-resistant polyester uniform that was 2 sizes too big. Her hair, once her pride and joy, was pulled back in a messy hairnet. Her nails were short and unpolished. She looked exhausted. "Hey, honey, more coffee?" a truck driver yelled from the counter. Brittany flinched. She grabbed the pot and hurried over. "I am coming, sir," Right away. She poured the coffee, her hand trembling slightly. The man didn't even look at her. He didn't see the influencer. He didn't see the golden child. He just saw a waitress. She turned and caught her reflection in the darkened window. For a second, she just stared at herself, seeing the ghost of the girl who used to sip champagne in Paris. Then she looked down at her shoes, the cheap rubber soles worn thin from standing all day. She wiped a table, tossed a dirty rag into a bin, and disappeared back into the kitchen to scrape leftovers off plates. She was finally living a life she had actually earned. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. This time there were no cameras. There were no hashtags. There was no performance. We stood in the garden of a private estate on the Amalfi Coast, surrounded by the scent of lemon blossoms and the sound of the sea crashing against the cliffs below. It was my wedding day, the real one. The one that actually mattered. The guest list was small, 50 people. None of them shared my DNA, but all of them shared my heart. There were my college friends who had let me sleep on their couches when I couldn't afford rent because I was paying my parents' mortgage. There were Dante's partners who respected my mind, not my bank account. There was the team from my crisis management firm, the people who had stood by me when the world briefly thought I was a villain. We sat at a long wooden table under a canopy of wisteria, passing platters of pasta and pouring wine that was meant to be drunk, not thrown. The laughter was loud and genuine. For the first time in my life, I looked around a room and did not feel a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I did not have to worry about my mother insulting the waitstaff or Brittany making a scene to get attention. The silence where my family should have been was not empty. It was peaceful. My assistant, who had flown in for the ceremony, approached the head table quietly. She looked hesitant. She placed a single envelope on the white tablecloth next to my hand. "I am so sorry to interrupt," she whispered. But this was forwarded from the office. It was marked urgent legal correspondence, so I brought it. But then I saw the return address. I looked at the envelope. The paper was cheap and rough. The stamp in the corner did not say law office. It said San Quentin State Prison. Dante saw it too. His hand tightened around his wine glass. "Do you want me to shred it?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, I need to see it." I slit the envelope open with a silver butter knife. I pulled out the single sheet of lined yellow paper. The handwriting was shaky, stripped of its usual pompous flourishes. "My dearest Audrey," it began. I skipped the first paragraph, which was a generic hollow apology about how much he missed me. I scanned down to the real reason he had wasted a stamp. "The commissary here is expensive," he wrote. "I need money for extra blankets and decent food. The other inmates are rough. I am an old man, Audrey. Please, just deposit $500 a month. It is nothing to you. You owe me that much. I am your father." I read the line again. You owe me. Even in a cage, even stripped of his freedom and his dignity, his entitlement remained intact. He still believed that my purpose on this earth was to serve him. He still believed that fatherhood was a transaction and that I was in debt. I looked up at Dante. He was watching me, ready to go to war for me again if I asked. But I didn't need a war. I had already won. "Bad news?" Dante asked. I looked at the letter one last time. It wasn't bad news, it was ancient history. "No," I said. "Just junk mail." I reached out and took the tall white taper candle burning in the crystal holder. I held the corner of the yellow paper to the flame. The fire caught instantly, hungry and bright. I held it up, watching the orange light consume the words. I watched the plea for money turn into black ash. I watched the guilt he tried to impose curl up and float away on the sea breeze. I held it until the flame reached my fingertips, then I dropped the burning remnant onto a ceramic plate. We watched it crumble into nothingness. I brushed the ash from my hands and picked up my champagne glass. I turned to my husband, my friends, my chosen family. "To the future," I said, my voice steady and clear. "To the future," they echoed. I took a sip of the cold, crisp wine, and it tasted like the sweetest thing in the world. It tasted like freedom. The vintage Cabernet swirled in the crystal decanter, a deep, rich crimson that caught the last light of the Italian sun. It was the same shade of red as the wine that had ruined my first wedding dress, the same color as the stain that had started this war. But tonight it did not look like a weapon. It looked like a celebration. Dante reached for the bottle. He poured a generous amount into my glass. The liquid settled at the bottom, dark and heavy. I watched it settle, mesmerizing in its stillness. There was no one here to knock it from my hand. There was no sister waiting in the wings with a practiced stumble. There was no mother ready to applaud my humiliation. There was only the sound of the ocean below and the soft jazz playing from the terrace. I stood up. The conversation at the table died down, not out of awkwardness, but out of respect. My friends looked up at me with smiles that reached their eyes. I looked down at my dress. It was a cascade of white silk, pristine and spotless. It rippled in the gentle sea breeze, glowing against the twilight. For years I had walked on eggshells, terrified of making a mess, terrified of the stains my family would cast upon my character. I had lived my life trying to keep a white dress clean in a mud fight, but I wasn't fighting anymore. The mud was gone. I wrapped my fingers around the stem of the glass. The crystal was cool against my skin. I held it out, suspending the red liquid over the snowy white fabric of my gown. A year ago, this motion would have made me flinch. A year ago, I would have been terrified of a spill. Now my hand was as steady as the cliffs we were standing on. I looked at Dante. He raised his glass to join mine. His eyes were full of pride. He knew what this moment meant. He knew that I wasn't just toasting to our marriage. I was toasting to my survival. I was toasting to the girl who finally learned that you cannot buy love, but you can certainly pay for peace of mind. I looked out at the horizon where the sky met the sea. I thought of Gavin in his cell counting the days. I thought of Joyce in her small room counting her regrets. I thought of Brittany in the diner counting her tips. They were ghosts, now fading memories of a bad dream that I had finally woken up from. I brought the glass to my lips. The aroma was rich and complex. I took a long, slow sip. The wine was bold. It was perfect. It warmed me from the inside out, chasing away the last lingering chill of the past. I lowered the glass, leaving a faint red imprint on my lips, a mark I chose to wear. My white dress danced around me in the wind, untouched, untainted, and free. I smiled at the guests. Then I looked directly into the camera of my own mind, delivering the final verdict on a life reclaimed. Red wine is only delicious when you are the one holding the glass. The saga of Audrey Wilson serves as a brutal but necessary reminder that blood is not always thicker than water. Sometimes it is just thicker than the mud people drag you through to serve their own ends. The most profound lesson here is that you cannot purchase respect with generosity. Nor can you fix a toxic dynamic with silence. For years, Audrey believed that being the good daughter meant absorbing abuse and funding a lifestyle she didn't share, hoping that one day her sacrifice would be currency for love. She learned the hard way that to a narcissist, kindness is not a gift. It is a weakness to be exploited. The story illustrates that true liberation requires the courage to let people face the consequences of their own actions. Audrey didn't destroy her family. She simply stopped saving them from the destruction they created. By allowing the stain to be seen rather than hiding it, she reclaimed her narrative. It teaches us that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but an act of survival. We must learn to distinguish between those who love us and those who are merely attached to how useful we are to them. Furthermore, the ending emphasizes that your true family consists of the people who celebrate your victories, not those who pray for your downfall. Audrey's pristine white dress at the finale symbolizes a life finally cleansed of other people's mess. The ultimate takeaway is that you are the only one responsible for filling your own cup. If you hand your glass to people who only know how to spill it, you will live a life of stains. You must be the one to hold the glass. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please subscribe to the channel to catch our next dramatic series.